On June 9th, a year to the day where Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow were found on Chad Daybell's property, Chad had a hearing where he was to be in front of the judge and actually plead guilty or not guilty. He had 8 charges against him. Now, he did plead not guilty, but today I thought we would do something a little bit different, something that I haven't done in a little while, and we're going to focus actually on Chad Daybell and his responses to the judge. I found a few interesting little tidbits that I think you would be interested in. Now, before we get started, it's notable that we saw Kay Woodcock in court, Colby Ryan. We also saw Natalie Pulowski, who is Ian Pulowski's ex-wife. Also behind Chad sat 3 of his children, Garth, Emma, and Seth. So the judge reads out the charges to Chad and the potential penalties of the 8 counts, which included conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and first-degree murder in the death of Tylee Ryan, JJ Vallow, and Tammy Daybell. There was also grand theft of deception for the death of Tylee and JJ, and also insurance fraud of the life insurance policies for Tammy Daybell. And in court, Chad responds to the understanding of each charge to the judge, and as I mentioned, there are little nuances in the way he responds to each charge. It's small, but there are differences, so let's take a look. Now, first, he's going to respond to the charge regarding to Tylee Ryan. And he seems distracted at first with John Pryor, flipping through pages, that kind of thing. But as soon as the judge mentions Tylee Ryan's name, you'll see him focus right in on the judge.
The indictment that was filed on May 25th in count 1 charges Mr. Daybell the offenses of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and grand theft by deception, both felony counts under Idaho Code 18-1701, 18-4003A, 18-24031, 18-24034A, 18-24071B3. The count in count 1 names Tylee Ryan as the victim on the murder charge, and that count carries a penalty on the murder charge of it is punishable by death or imprisonment for life, and it provides that if the death penalty is not pursued by the state, then the court shall impose a life sentence with a minimum period of incarceration of 10 years.
At the moment the judge mentions grand theft, you can see Chad kind of squint his eyes.
The grand theft portion of that charge has a penalty of up to 14 years of prison and a fine of up to $5,000 and possible restitution.
Now, he seems also to swallow pretty hard in this next clip and some nose twitching and that kind of thing. But what caught my eye is at the point where he says he understands the charges, and it's very, very subtle. And I have said this before about Chad, that I wonder if it's duper's delight or duping delight. There's something there. So we'll take a look, and I'll have another point to show you later on in this video, and it also relates to Tylee.
That's a summary of those charges, and you've waived the reading of the charges. So let me ask you on that count 1, Mr. Daybell, do you understand the charge and those possible penalties?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
Okay. The next count in the indictment is count 2. That is a count of first-degree murder under Idaho Code 18-4001, 18-4002, 18-4003, subsection A, and 18-4004. And that count names Tylee Ryan as the victim. The possible penalty or punishment for that count is by death or imprisonment for life, and if the death penalty is not pursued, then the court shall impose a life sentence with a minimum period of incarceration of 10 years. Do you understand that charge and the possible penalties?
Yes, Your Honor.
Next is the charges related to JJ, and if you look closely, Chad is actually a little bit different in the way he responds to this as opposed to when he was responding to Tylee. He's a little distracted still again, but he does look down a couple times. You'll see him. And after that, he says he understands the charges, which you'll see in a minute, but his mouth is a little different this time.
Count 3 of the indictment charges conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and grand theft by deception. Those are felonies under the same code cites that were previously listed under count 1. That count names Joshua Jackson Vallow, also known as J.J. Vallow, as the named victim in that count. And the penalty for those charges on the conspiracy to commit first-degree murder is punishable by death or imprisonment for life. And if the death penalty is not pursued, then the court shall impose a life sentence with a minimum period of incarceration of 10 years. On the charge of grand theft by deception, that would have a penalty of up to 14 years in prison and a fine of up to $5,000. Do you understand the charge in count 3 and those possible penalties, Mr. Daybell?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very well. Count 4 of the indictment charges you with first-degree murder, a felony under the statute previously cited in the other counts also. That count names J.J. Vallow as the victim, and again is punishable by death or imprisonment for life. If the death penalty is not pursued, then the court shall impose a life sentence with a minimum period of incarceration of up to 10 years. Do you understand count 4 and the possible penalties, Mr. Daybell?
Yes, Your Honor.
I don't see the dupers like I did see with Tylee, and it seems almost like he possibly feels different when it comes to JJ and Tylee, just based on the differences here. This is just an observation in my opinion. Now there's also a hard swallow as well, like we saw when the judge was talking about Tylee and reading those charges. Next up is Tammy Daybell. Now, at the beginning of the charges, when the judge was reading, you'll see Chad lift up his chin and take a deep breath. There's also yet another hard swallow, and then Chad does something with his mouth. Now, it comes across as though something is bothering him. He actually does it twice, and you'll see him say, yes, Your Honor, that kind of thing, and then he moves his mouth like that. Take a look. He actually does it twice.
All right, the next count listed in the indictment is count 5, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. That count names Tammy Daybell as the named victim. It's charged again under Idaho Code 18-4001, 18-4003, subsection A, and 18-1701. And that count is also punishable by death or imprisonment for life. And if the death penalty is not pursued, then the court shall impose a life sentence with a minimum period of incarceration of 10 years. Do you understand the charge in count 5 and the possible penalties?
Yes, Your Honor.
Count 6 of the indictment is a charge of first-degree murder. That names Tammy Daybell as the victim. It's charged under Idaho Code 18-4001, 18-204, and 18-4003, subsection A. That count also is punishable by death or imprisonment for life, provided that if the death penalty is not pursued, then the court shall impose a life sentence with a minimum period of incarceration of 10 years. Do you understand count 6 and those possible penalties, Mr. Daybell?
Yes, Your Honor.
And here is where it gets quite interesting in my opinion. The next set of charges that the judge reads out is regarding the insurance fraud of Tammy's life insurance policy. Now, after the judge reads them out loud, Chad says, "Yes, I do, Your Honor," or "Yes, Your Honor," and watch while he nods his head in agreement right after that. He'll say yes, and then another thing I noticed is as the judge was reading out this charge, he shifts his eyes back and forth really quickly. You'll see it, and he'll do it really quickly and then says yes, and then head bobs. And then at the end of this, he bites his upper lip.
All right, count 7 of the indictment is not a charge against you, it's a charge against a co-conspirator. Count 8 of the indictment charges you, Mr. Daybell, with the crime of insurance fraud, which is a felony under Idaho Code section 41-293. That is a felony that carries up to 15 years in prison. and a fine of up to $15,000 plus restitution. Do you understand that charge and those possible penalties?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, count 9 is also a charge of insurance fraud under that same statute. It carries the same penalty I just mentioned in count 8, which again is 15 years of prison and a $15,000 fine plus restitution. Do you understand that charge and those possible penalties?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, that is a summary then of the charges that have been filed against you and the penalties. I would also note those penalties.
Now, also, when the judge talks about these penalties being run consecutively or concurrently, Chad also does the head bob in agreement. It's interesting.
Summary then of the charges that have been filed against you and the penalties. I would also note those penalties in each of the counts could be ordered to be served either concurrently, meaning running together, or consecutively. And so do you understand those charges could also run consecutively in those different counts, Mr. Daybell?
Yes, I do.
And I'll get to the part where he pleads not guilty, but I do want to point out that he's in agreement with these head nods in the understanding of the charges and the penalties regarding the insurance policy, but yet we don't see any of that when it comes to Tylee, JJ, or Tammy's charges. Now let's talk about his plea. Remember how I talked about Duper's delight with Tylee? We're gonna see it again when he actually pleads not guilty to Tylee's charge, but we won't see that in the others. This is what really made me take notice. Now, we've seen Chad do this before. I've mentioned this before in the preliminary hearing where the exhibits were being shown to the defense. And as that was shown, you could see Chad leer and look at what's on there, and you could see a little bit of a smirk or that duping delight, in my opinion. There's some amusement of some sort. Now, also something very important, when Chad says he's not guilty of each charge, he does it with an upward inflection in his voice. It's also called uptalk. I find it very interesting. So instead of saying not guilty, he says not guilty, like a question. If I'm sitting there and I'm, being charged for murder, I'm sure as heck gonna make a statement that's pretty prominent saying not guilty. So here, instead of him being sure of himself, he sounds like he's making it a question mark, making it unsure or sounding unsure. Now, it could be something he normally does and he talks like that or has a habit of doing. We've seen that with Kiara Collins in the Justin Evans case. In one of her recent interviews, she does a lot of the upticks and answers like a question, but I think that might be more of a pattern with her, whereas here I'm not sure, but we kind of know a little bit more in the details when it comes to this, so I think we all know what we're thinking. But this is an observation. I'd be more, hell no, I'm not guilty. Just plain not guilty. Not guilty? Right, guys? You want to believe me, right? Anybody? Anybody, Lucille?
At this point, I would ask your client how he intends to plea. Before I do that, Mr. Pryor, do you have any questions for the court or anything you need to discuss with your client before I ask for the plea?
No, Judge, and I anticipate that my client will be entering a plea of not guilty to all of the charges.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Pryor. I will go through them then individually again. On count 1 of the indictment, Mr. Daybell, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
We'll enter the not guilty plea on count 1. On count 2, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
On count 3, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
On count 4, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
On count 5, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
On count 6, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
On count 8, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
And on count 9, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
Now, one more thing that's interesting. In count 6 was pertaining to Tammy Daybell and the first-degree murder charge. And there's ever so slightly a little eyebrow raised when he says not guilty. Just another observation.
On count 6, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
Now, speaking of pleas, Kay Woodcock and Colby Ryan were outside being interviewed by Nate Eaton from East Idaho News. And when it came to the plea, Kay Woodcock said, I think he should just give it up, How do you have 2 kids in your backyard and you don't know anything about it? He's a liar. He's a liar. And Colby says, seeing him, knowing he did it, and knowing everything about the truth, this whole process is really hard. We've all had to go through it, but he's going to say what he's going to say. He's going to lie about it. From the beginning, they have lied. There's nothing you can do about it. Now, quickly, I'm going to combine the answer that Chad gives on each count and just make it a really short clip so you can see the differences up close in his response. And I'll also compare the 2 of Tylee, where the charge is being read with that duping delight and also with the not guilty charge.
Count 1, Mr. Daybell, do you understand the charge and those possible penalties?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
Okay. How do you plead?
Not guilty.
We'll enter the not. Do you understand that charge and the possible penalties?
Yes, Your Honor.
Count 2, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
Do you understand the charge in count 3 and those possible penalties, Mr. Daybell?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very well. On count 3, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
Do you understand count 4 and the possible penalties, Mr. Daybell?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. On count 4, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
Do you understand the charge in count 5 and the possible penalties?
Yes, Your Honor.
On count 5, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
Count 6 and those possible penalties, Mr. Daybell.
Yes, Your Honor.
On count 6, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
Do you understand that charge and those possible penalties?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. On count 8, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
Do you understand that charge and those possible penalties?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. That is a, and on count 9, how do you plead?
Not guilty.
Very well. Not guilty pleas are entered as to all the counts in the indictment.
Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. People have patterns and the truth is in the details. Now, Chad will be back in court on June 23rd, and then the trial dates will be set. The change of venue, though, is still an issue. If you remember, John Pryor was pushing to get that, so stay tuned for that. Now, Lori is now going to be going and getting her restorative treatment, so her hearings are on hold until she is competent. Everything's on hold, then she'll come back. If the judge comes back and says, okay, now she's competent, then everything will resume. So let's have a chit chat below. Let me know what your thoughts are, and please subscribe if you haven't done so already. I'm always having new videos, and don't forget to share and don't forget to like. Thank you so much for watching. See you soon.